We began last week with verses 2 and 3 of Proverbs chapter 10. And I said to you then that you do not have a complete biblical Christian worldview unless that includes the Christian's view of finances. You cannot, because so much of our life is spent in the area of trying to make a living and trying to figure out how to pay the bills, that you cannot really have a biblical perspective on life unless it also includes a biblical perspective on finances. Jesus said, no one can serve two masters. You'll either hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Now, he didn't say you can't have God and money. He said you can't serve God and money. And so we began last week with verses 2 and 3. As I was looking at Proverbs chapter 10, I shared with you last week, I appreciate the fact that you're praying because this chapter starts just very miscellaneous kind of statements that Solomon gives us. But it hit me as I was looking at verses 2 through 5 that these have to do with finances. They have to do with principles governing our finance. And so we're calling it Finance 101. Last week was class 1. Verse 2, make your money honestly and use it righteously. Ill-gotten treasures have no lasting value, but righteousness delivers from death. Verse 3, God is your provider. The Lord does not let the righteous go hungry, but he thwarts the craving of the wicked. Today we come to verses 4 and 5. Verse 4, you have to do your part. Lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth. And verse 5, understand the importance of timing. He who gathers crops in summer is a prudent son, but he who sleeps during harvest is a disgraceful son. So we're ready for principles for 3 and 4 from verses 4 and 5. You have to do your part and understand the importance of timing. If you are watching this and you hear banging in the background, nothing's going on at your house. They're just doing some work next door to us and it's being picked up. For those of you who are here, pray that I'll be able to keep my focus and not try to preach in rhythm with banging. That could get to be very difficult with me because white guys don't have rhythm. So, at least not this one. So 4 principles of finance. Make your money honestly and use it righteously. God is your provider. Verse 4, you have to do your part. Lazy hands make for poverty. Diligent hands bring wealth. Kind of an interesting contrast. Lazy hands and diligent hands. Now the word lazy there sometimes is translated deceitful. But you get the idea of just lazy, not doing much. Back when we studied the ant and talked about the sluggard or the slothful person. And I told you last week, I went ahead and gave you a little insight last week, that the Hebrew word for hands in lazy hands is a different word than the one with diligent hands. And that was just fascinating to me when I saw that. The hands attached to lazy hands means an open, ineffective hand. Now, with an open hand, you can't hold a rake. You can't hold a plow. You can't do much of any kind of work with an open hand. And the Hebrew writer here, he's saying these lazy hands, they're open, they're ineffective, they're not ready to go to work. And they lead to poverty. Diligent hands, and that word diligent is a fascinating word. It means to be active, and it means to pay attention to detail. It describes a person who is particular about small coins and moments and minutes, the little things. You may have heard the story when Michelangelo was working on one of his sculptures and one of his students said, why are you spending so much time on all these little trifling details of this statue? And Michelangelo said, trifles make perfection, and perfection is no trifle. Well, the diligent here of diligent hands, it's somebody who pays attention to detail. Somebody who gets the little things right. Who understands the importance of the small things in life. And the word hand here means to be tense and braced and ready to go to work. So that's why I say you have to do your part. You don't reap unless you sow. If you're waiting to fill in that blank, there it is. You don't reap unless you sow. The next verse tells us that the lazy person sleeps during harvest, but the diligent person takes advantage of the opportunities they're given. And what's interesting also, lazy hands make for poverty, the grammar of that phrase means they do it to themselves. A lazy-handed person makes themselves poor. It's not somebody did something to them. They brought it on themselves because of their laziness. So this principle that you have to do your part is true in finances, but it's also true in every other area of life. We have to do our part. We can't do God's part. He won't do our part. And I don't know about you, but I find that some of the most frustrating times I have in my life is when I'm trying to do God's part and wanting Him to do my part. It doesn't work that way. I cannot do God's part. He will not do my part. It's Philippians chapter 2, verse 12. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill His good purpose. This is spiritual synergism. A synergism is when two entities work together to accomplish something together greater than one of them can do by themselves. And that's what God and us working together can do. God will not do our part. We can't do His part. But when we work together, when we work out what God has worked in, great things get done. In other words, if you are lazy in your spiritual disciplines, prayer, scripture, obedience, those things, if you're lazy in those, you're going to be spiritually poor. If you are diligent in maintaining your relationship with God, in doing those spiritual disciplines, you will be spiritually rich. You have to do your part. In every area of life, you don't reap unless you sow. Next verse, verse 5. He who gathers crops in summer is a prudent son. That word means wise or skillful. But he who sleeps during harvest is a disgraceful son. And that word sleep there doesn't mean take a nap. It means deep, sunken deep into laziness and idleness. This principle to me is understanding the importance of timing. Doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done. Well, that's the key to life, isn't it? Doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done. That's the reason that I'm here speaking to you today rather than playing in the NBA this afternoon making $12 million a year. I can make a basket. I can make a free throw. I just can't do it when it needs to be done. You may have to give me several chances. But doing what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, that's the key to timing. And that's so important in our lives. And I listed there some other proverbs that teach the same principle. Proverbs 19:15, laziness casts one into a deep sleep, an idle person will suffer hunger. Chapter 12, verse 24, the hand of the diligent will rule, the lazy man will be put to forced labor. And 12:27, the lazy man doesn't even roast what he took in hunting, but diligence is man's precious possession. There are seasons for sowing and reaping. That's true in agriculture. You talk to farmers, not alone farmers, if you have, 3 rows of something in your backyard that you grow, you know that there are seasons for sowing. And there are seasons for reaping. And if you don't sow at the right time, there will be nothing there to reap. I heard people say, I've got 2 rows of corn and a row of watermelons in my backyard. How'd it going this year? Not doing good. I didn't get them in time. They're talking about timing. There's the right time to sow. There's the right time to reap. Depending on the crop you want, determines when you sow it. And the importance of timing is critical to being successful in our lives, not just financially, but in every area of your life. If you don't sow at the right time, you won't reap. That's true financially. It's true in other areas of life too. And as I get older, I'm more impressed with the seasons of life. And I'm talking more there than just about, the fall of life or the winter of life. I'm talking about the seasons, the times of life. As you look back over your life, there are seasons when you're sowing. Doesn't seem like you're reaping much, but you're sowing. And then there are seasons where you reap what you sowed sometimes decades before. And you thought you were wasting your time when you were sowing all of those because you didn't get a harvest right away. Well, it wasn't harvest time yet. And we have to learn to be patient, with God, because He's a farmer, and He talks a lot about times and seasons. We talk about seconds and minutes. He talks about times and seasons. And if you try to do something out of season, you'll be frustrated. So financially that timing is important. I do not remember the stock because it was like the first time I'd heard anything much about stocks. But I remember early in our married life, some famous company crashed. And their stock was like a dime or 20 cents or something like that. And somebody said, Ken, you need to buy some stock. Well, at the time, there was like a minimum order because of the way the situation was. You had to buy 1,000 shares or something like that. And that was a couple $100, and we did not have a couple $100, and can't do it. I forget which company that was, but about 2 years later, the stock was like $25. Boy, I could have made some money on that, but I didn't have what I needed at the time. And we all understand the importance of timing when it comes to finances and when it comes to other areas of our life. And that's what I want to spend the balance of our time today talking about. If you'll let me pivot away from the importance of timing with financing to the importance of timing in our daily living. This began to be kind of a passion with me several years ago when I read an article that introduced me to a term, the molten moment. And I was reading an article that was written by a pastor in McKeesbort, Pennsylvania. And he talked about visiting what at the time was the world's largest steel tube rolling mill. This was the place where, those tubes of steel, those hollow tubes of steel were made without any seams or anything. And he said, they let me go into the command module and I watched this liquid molten metal come into this machine. It was chopped off, and the machine would grasp both ends of it and begin to spin it. And the centrifugal force would cause that metal to open from the inside out, and it would form a perfect tube of steel. And he said, I asked the operator of the equipment, what's the most important part of this process? And he said, the temperature of the metal. If it's too cold, it won't open. If it's too hot, it flies apart. Unless you catch the molten moment, he said, you can't make the perfect tube. Now, I want you to get into your brain that term, the molten moment, because you face them regularly in your life. There's this new author out. I think he's going to probably become famous, Bill Shakespeare. I don't know if you've heard of him or not. But he wrote something about the molten moment. He said, there is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and miseries. On such a full sea we are now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves or lose our ventures. Those of you who were alive in the 80s maybe remember the old Coca-Cola commercial with Max Headroom, that little computer thing, catch the wave. That's what he's talking about. Catch the wave. You may remember Victor Kiam's commercial. He's the guy that held up the Remington shaver and said, "I love this shaver so much, I bought the company." Well, I read a book that he wrote, and he said, "I didn't always get it right." He said, "I missed one." He said, "Somebody came to me with a product that was a fabric that would adhere to itself without any zippers or staples or tracks or anything. It would adhere to itself. They offered me the patent for $25,000. I said, there is no way anybody's going to use that." And he said, "I missed out on Velcro." Timing, right? The right thing at the right time. What I remember, to me, the most dramatic illustration of this, back in the 70s and early 80s, the conflict between Betamax and VHS. The reason I think about that is because I kind of I didn't live through it, but I was alive and making decisions during all of this. There was a guy on our board at the time who came back from one of his annual expositions, and he said, "Man, you guys will not believe what's getting ready to come down the tube in the next couple years." He said, "We all know about cassette recorders that you can put music on." He says, "They have got this box now that they're working on that is going to have like a big cassette. And you can put movies on it and TV shows and training sessions, and you plug it into this machine and connect it to your TV, and you're going to be able to watch it on TV." And, oh, now see, y'all say, "Well, we know about Netflix." Well, this is way before Netflix or on demand. This was before cable, you know. This was 3 channels if you're lucky. And it's like, man, this is the most incredible thing ever. Well, there were 2 formats. Sony was pushing VHS. JVC was pushing, Sony was pushing Betamax. JVC was pushing VHS. The church I was pastoring at the time, we had a Christian day school. And we thought this is an incredible opportunity, because instead of paying to send our teachers all over the place for seminars, we can buy a training session or rent a training video and just have a meeting and show it, and it'll be right here. This is great. But which one should we buy? Should we buy Betamax or should we buy VHS? And I talked to a lot of people, at the video stores and different places, and everybody said VHS is the way to go. Okay. That proved to be true. Those of you who are old enough to remember going to a video store to rent movies, may remember back then, they had 15 shelves of VHS and there were 6 Betamax, But Sony had an opportunity to buy into the VHS format and turned it down because they thought Betamax was the way to go. Because Betamax was a higher quality picture and you could get longer minutes on their cassette. And they continued to push Betamax and lost, in case you don't know, VHS won, and Sony lost billions of dollars because they missed the timing of their decision. It's important to understand timing, doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done. That's why it's so important that the underlying theme in all of our messages from the book of Proverbs, make sure you have God's wisdom, make sure you have His understanding, make sure you develop the fear of the Lord. Because if you have those qualities in your life, He will give you insight about the timing. You'll just know, I need to do this now. And He will give you that insight. But I want to give you just a couple of biblical examples of the importance of timing. One is the Garden of Gethsemane. I think that this may be the most poignant episode in the life of Jesus. It's when He is getting ready to be betrayed. Matthew chapter 26, verse 36. Then Jesus went with His disciples to a place called Gethsemane. He said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And He took Peter and James and John along with Him. And He began to be sorrowful and troubled, and He said, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. And going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, My Father, if it's possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour, he asked Peter. Watch and pray so that you won't fall into temptation. The spirit's willing, but the flesh is weak. He went away a second time and prayed, My Father, if it's not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. And when he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Now stop and think about this. This is Jesus in his humanity facing the cross. And he says to his closest disciples, Peter, James, and John, you come with me a little further into the garden and stay here and keep watch with me. And then he went on a little bit further and prayed. When he came back, they were asleep. They missed the current. They missed the molten moment. They missed the wave. They had an opportunity to observe firsthand how Jesus handled suffering. They had the opportunity to listen close and personal as Jesus wrestled with, nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. And when he came back from that agony, remember the scripture says he sweat blood? He finds them asleep. Now, why do you think he went back to them? Don't you think maybe he needed some encouragement? Needed to know that somebody was there praying with him and awake with him and being there with him? And he comes back and they're asleep. He wakes them up and asks them again to stay awake. And when he comes back the second time, they're asleep again, and he lets them sleep this time. They missed it. They missed it. They missed an opportunity to minister to Jesus at the point of his deepest human need. That kicks me in the stomach, because Matthew 25 says when you minister to other people in need, you're ministering to Jesus. Don't miss the wave. Understand the importance of timing. And often the molten moment comes as interruptions in our day. Matthew chapter 15, the Canaanite woman comes to Jesus asking for help for her demon-possessed daughter, and his disciples said, she's bothering us, send her away, but she keeps persisting, and she got her miracle. And if you read the Gospels, there are more than one occasion where Jesus is on his way somewhere else and he gets interrupted and performs a miracle. Because Jesus lived with the understanding of the importance of timing. And that the things that to his disciples were interruptions weren't really interruptions at all. They were his mission. Now, I would imagine whether you write it down or not, you have a to-do list for your day. Please know God has a to-do list for you also. And his to-do list often looks like interruptions to you, because they interrupt you doing your to-do list. And I had to come to a point years ago when I realized that the things that I looked at in interruptions were probably what God wanted me to do that day. And I needed to learn to relax a little bit about that. That it's not so important that I get everything on my list done. It's important that I get what's on his list done, because that's probably his will for me that day. Because for a Christian, goal setting is not just about reaching your goal. It's how you get there and what happens to you and what happens to other people along the way on that journey. Pay attention to the interruptions of your life. Be open to those molten moments. When the timing is right, that right then you're able to minister to that person. How can you do that? How can we develop the importance of timing in our lives? I already mentioned, be open to God. Develop God's wisdom and his understanding and the fear of the Lord. Stay tuned to his voice Know his voice. Be open to God. Lord, what do you have me to do today? Help me to be aware of your plan for me today. And then you have to be willing to take risks. Matthew chapter 10, verse 39, whoever finds his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Part of being willing to serve the Lord is being willing to take risks. But not risks just for the sake of risk. That's not virtuous. Stan Mooneyham wrote, anybody can lose his life. The supreme tragedy is to lose your life for nothing. Jesus says it counts if it's for my sake and the gospel's. And if we're going to be willing to take risks, if we're going to be willing to break out of our comfort zone and minister to other people, we have to have a solid faith in a sovereign God. You probably more or less have memorized the last part of Romans chapter 8. What shall separate us from the love of Christ? And then he says in verse 38, I'm convinced neither death nor life or angels or demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that's in Christ Jesus our Lord. Not even the future can separate you from the love of Christ. I've got a sign in my office that says, don't be afraid of tomorrow, God is already there. And we need to understand that for all of the tomorrows of our lives, and whatever those tomorrows may hold, God is going to be there with us. We don't have to be afraid. He's going to give us the grace to face what we face when we need the grace to face it. If you read church history, you may know the name John Huss. He was burned at the stake for his faith. The night before his execution, he's sitting in his cell and there's a candle on the table. And he's, in his humanity, mulling over, they're going to burn me at the stake tomorrow. And he reached out his hand to get into the flame of the candle and couldn't do it and pulled back. And he was so disheartened. How in the world am I going to be able to stand being burned at the stake for my faith tomorrow if I can't stand the heat from this candle? But witnesses who witnessed John Huss's martyrdom and wrote about it said that they tied him to the stake, they lit the flames, and as the fire reached around his body, they could hear him singing hymns of praise. Not even the future can separate you from the love of God. You may have things in your life where you say, oh man, if this happens, how am I going to handle it? If this happens, how am I going to handle it? You're going to handle it the same way you've handled everything else with God. With God. Well, I don't think I could do that. Well, you probably can't today. But when you're called on to do it, He's going to be there. That's the importance of timing. He gives you the grace when you need the grace. He gives you the wisdom when you need it. He gives you the strength when you need it. Don't try to borrow it from tomorrow. It's going to be there. Remember we talked about God seeing ahead of time last week. God is your provider. He sees ahead of time what you need, and He's already provided it. 4 principles that govern our finances, that govern how we live our lives as a believer. Make your money honestly and use it righteously. Remember that God is your provider for everything you need in every area of your life. But you have to do your part. You got to sow when it's time to sow so you can reap when it's time to reap. And understand then the importance of timing. And as God impresses on your mind, call this person, speak to this person, reach out to this person. Do it. Understand the importance of timing. And watch God use you in ways way beyond your comprehension. Because again, that's spiritual synergism. When you work out what God has worked in you, some good things can happen to the glory of God. Father, thank you that we can trust you and that nothing can separate us from your love. And for so many of us, Lord, that's what it is. It's the future that concerns us sometimes. We look at our nation, we look at this world, we look maybe at our health or situations on the job or whatever it is, and if we're not careful, we allow the devil to get us to to start that descent into worry and fear and what if this and what if this. Lord, help us to realize that none of that can separate us from you and your love. And you're going to be with us in all of the tomorrows, just as you have been with us. As Paul said, you have delivered us, you are delivering us, and we know you will deliver us. That whatever's going on in our lives, you have the grace that we need for it. We thank you for that. And may our lives be lived so in tune with you that we catch those molten moments, those opportunities to speak a word for you, to speak a word of encouragement, to pray a prayer for grace, whatever it may be that's needed, Father. Help us to be so in tune with you that we know the importance of timing and we become more successful at doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done. May your Spirit live in us and flow through us and then out from us to touch those that we come in contact with on a regular basis, I pray. And now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine on you and give you his peace now and evermore. Amen. God bless you. Thanks for coming out today.